Hello and welcome back to our video series on painting. Today we're going to be covering the basics of watercolor painting. Now what you need for watercolor painting is pretty simple. First off, you're going to need some kind of heavier set paper. Now I would suggest not using computer paper because it's just not as thick as you would need it to be. The kind of paper that you're going to want is paper that's at least 80-pound weight. This is actually 140-pound weight. And you're going to want it to have a little bit of a tooth on it. What that means is a little bit of a texture. Now the weight of the paper is basically how thick it is. For instance, you can see how thick that paper is. It's a lot thicker than standard computer paper. What you're also going to need is brushes. Now you do not have to have the fancy watercolor brushes. Actually, what you need is a very soft bristled brush like this. As long as it's a soft bristled brush, you'll be fine. You're going to need 2 containers of water. You're going to need one that you're going to use to rinse your brushes out with, and you're going to need one that you're using that is clean water. If you mix up paints and you use water that is not clean, it's going to get a very muddy look to it, and it's not going to be as nice. You're going to need something to wash your brushes off with, so we're going to have a standard paper towel. I mean, it's pretty common with painting. You're going to need something to wipe your brushes with. You're also going to need to have watercolor paints. Now, what I like to use is a watercolor set like this. A lot of artists prefer to use tubes because wells, they think, are kind of childish. I like these. I think that these are just as usable as the tubes, and they cost a lot less. This is the kind that I always use, and if you know how to use it, you can make really nice artworks using these as well. Finally, you're going to need to have some kind of a palette. I typically have a painter's palette that I use with this. I'm just going to be using this bowl right here. It works just as well, and we basically just need it to hold water. So there are 3 different types of styles of painting when you have watercolor painting. I have one that I started right here for another video. I'm just going to go ahead and use it as an example. There are 3 different types of painting, like I said. First is called wet on wet, and that's what these 2 look like right there. That and that are both examples of wet on wet. And what that means is you take a brush, dip it in your clean water, and you paint an area with water. That makes it wet. Then you take your paintbrush, you load it up with wet pigment, or in other words, watercolor, and you apply it to the wet surface. And as you can see, it spreads all over the place. It branches out. That is called wet on wet, and wet on wet is really good for blending and mixing colors. Just like this. If I put blue down, you can see that the colors are actually mixing and blending together. Eventually, it's going to turn out like that right there. Now it comes to wet on dry, which means you have wet paint or wet pigment and you're putting it on a dry surface, just like that right there. So I'm going to take wet paint like this, and I'm going to apply it to a dry surface like that. And you get very crisp, clean lines when you do that. Next comes what I like to call dry wet, which means it's basically a mixture between the 2. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to get some clean water, and I'm going to show you what happens whenever you apply wet water, or sorry, just water in general, on a dry surface that has wet paint on it, and you get a mixture of both of them, just like that. Now those are the 3 styles of painting with watercolor that you are going to experiment with. Now this picture I pulled off the internet. I Googled anime girl, I believe, so let's bring that picture up for us. Yeah, right there. And I give this example because I want my students to see the difference between outlining a picture or going in and detailing it. So one is just a simple outline, and the other one is a detailed sketch with shading. And the same principles of wet on wet were applied on both of these drawings up at the very top. Same pattern, same color, a little bit of blue with some green mixed in with it. Now let me show you how to paint with watercolors. Now whenever you paint with watercolors, you do not just take your paintbrush and scoop in the paint and plop it right down on the painting. That's not what you do. You paint with the water. That is why it's called watercolor. So what you want to do, you want to scoop out some water, put it into your palette right there, and then you want to go into whatever pigment you want. For instance, the next color I need is going to be kind of like a purple. So I'm going to dig right into the purple, and I put my brush across and I stroked across on top of that. And then I'm going to go right over here to my clean water in my palette, and there I have my pigment. Now the more water you have, the more your pigment is going to, well, be translucent, or it's not going to show up as bright. But that's okay because, like I said, you're painting with the water, not the pigment. So now we're going to go up here, and I'm going to add in some details right along in here. You don't have to use a big brush like this. I'm just doing this because it's quick. And the paints have already dried, so this is going to be a wet on dry. I'm just going to add in a few little details right here. Okay, and now I'm going to take some water, rinse off my brush, and I'm going to just blend some of these in. Now, as I said, I like to use this as an example to show my students the two different types of watercolor methods. By going in and adding in your shading first, you actually create more of a depth to your paintings, but it also looks more like a sketch more than a finished product or a realistic image. Now, on the other hand, if you want to make it look more realistic and more fluid, then you want to go with the basic outlines just so you can see where the colors are going to lie. For instance, let's go ahead and we'll add in the same details and the same kind of pigments into this picture over here. So now that we added in both the same colors on the left and right image, you might notice that the image over here doesn't seem as shaded or detailed, and that's because we don't have any shading on there. If this is the concept that you're going with, you want to add in some more shading. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and start off by adding in some dark values, and you want to have darker values of the values that are on there. That doesn't necessarily mean that you add in black. For instance, I'm going to start adding in purple right about right here. And I'm also going to add in a little bit of green. So add in some water to it. And a little bit of green. And that is going to give us a nice dark shade. So as you may notice right here, I'm starting to add in some more colors and details, and I'm starting to get some darker values down. Now, your darker values you want to be very careful with, because with watercolor, you never get white back. As soon as you get rid of the white, it's gone forever. So if you have a white area in your picture that you want to leave white, you have to leave it white. The white of the paper is the only white that you're going to get out of a watercolor. Now, something that a lot of my students have trouble with is painting skin, and I'm just going to go ahead and give a brief demonstration on this. So to do this, I'm going to enlarge my picture right here. And I'd like to point out that the skin is more white than anything else. So obviously you want to leave the white of your paper. Now, skin tone on humans is typically built up with multiple colors, starting with the blue in your veins and then adding a little bit of red to your pigment and then just building up from there. It takes a very long time to get those colors just right. Now, there is an easier method of doing that, and that just involves you mixing your colors to a very light red. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water right there. I'm going to take a dab of red, just a little bit, and I'm going to water this down. I'm going to water this down a lot. And then I'm going to add just a touch of yellow. Just a touch of yellow right there. Add that to it. And what I'm doing to load this up, I'm just putting my brush down and I'm rolling it into the pigment. Now, you do that with a rounded brush. If you have a flat brush, you just graze it across it like that. What I'm doing, I'm rolling it. So, roll that in there. Add a little bit more water to it. And now I want to add just a drop of blue water, not even the pigment. So I got a little bit of blue water right there, and I'm going to just add a little bit to it. And that will give you the pigment of skin. So I'm going to jump right back down here, and I'm going to look at my original picture, and I'm going to add in the skin color as I see it. And what you want to do is you want to try to build this up. Now next, I'm going to need to add some red in there. So I'm going to shrink this picture back down so we can actually see what we're working with. I'm going to have to add in some red. So I need to, well, first I'm going to quickly wash this down so we can have a nice little bit of color in here. You can add in some wet on wet right here. I actually like to do both, where I add in a little bit of water, a little bit of dry on wet, and a little bit of wet on dry, and just kind of mix it all in together. That works out best for me. You can do however you want. The best way to learn how to watercolor is just to practice and do it yourself. Okay, now I'm going to start adding in some reds because her face is very blushed. So we're going to go in here. I'm going to add some red right down here, and I'm going to dilute it with water quite a bit because I just want a nice little pink tone. And I'm going to get a little bit of yellow as well. And the reason why we do that is because if we don't add in yellow, it's going to look like that she just wore way too much makeup and she's going to look like a clown. So I'm going to add in a little bit of red right there. Red and yellow right down here. And I'm going to add that around into that area. I added a little bit too much yellow, but that's okay. We'll just add a little bit more red. And that looks very close to what we need. Now, I mentioned this before. If you get a color down there and you don't like the color, while it's wet, just blot it back up. It won't take it up completely, but it'll take it up enough. So now we have this. We're going to add that down here. And we're going to want to bleed that out a little bit. Add some more water to it so it's not as bright, and it comes up here as well. So that's good. Blot that out a little bit. There we have it. Nice little skin tone. Now for the lips, and if I zoom into the picture here, you can see that the lips are just a very light shade of pink that bleeds down. So I'm going to use the same color that we just made here, just as a highlight shadow, and I'm going to go in and make a very fine line right there, the top of the lip and the bottom of the lip on the inside. And that's it. I'm going to let that sit there. Now, that white area, I'm not going to touch. All I did is I just got my little bit of water on my paintbrush, went over that with the colors, and there we have it. Now, I did have a little bit that bled out onto the cheek. I should have waited for that to be dry before I did that, but let's just dab that up. And now whenever it's dry, we can go back over it with a little bit more, and it will be more like the original picture. Now, I know this picture is far from finished, but I hope that you have learned a few painting techniques. I hope that you have enjoyed this. If you have, please like and subscribe. Let me know. Leave some comments. Tell me what you think about it. Until next time, have a good day. Thank you for watching.